thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
Very well. It's nice to be here with you, Maria. Thanks for having me.
So listen, I'm excited because I think I'm going to learn a lot here, and I like sort of getting under the skin and understanding a bit about psychology. It's a fascinating topic. How did you get into this specific area of psychology, though? Because it's very niche.
Yeah, it is. So my background, I did a degree in psychology. I ended up spending some time learning design and development of websites for a while, and then got to a point where I thought, well, if physical environments shape human behavior, then one would assume that the same can be said for virtual environments. And that was back in 2010, 2011. And there wasn't any research that I could find in book form or like for the public. And so I thought, well, in the absence of that or any further studies, UX wasn't a field yet back then. I'll write a book on the research that I want to read about to see what we can see about human behavior in online environments. And so that kind of was a starting point for thinking about behavioral sciences, consumer psychology, and how we interact with technology. And then with this sort of more consumer focused, leadership focused, business focused book with Business Unusual, excuse me, it was much more about how can we use some of these same principles in this different context to understand how to build resilience in the face of uncertainty and unpredictability and change. What can we learn from the science and the psychology and the research that tells us about things like leadership or things like psychological organizational safety and psychological safety? What can we learn about these things and draw into organizational practices today in order to help us do better with business? Just kind of those stepping stones and key themes, really.
And it's so topical now, of course, because we're spending so much time online. I mean, my goodness, literally, my life is online. I feel I'm constantly looking at two-dimensional people. The fact you mentioned that there wasn't any research, is that what moved you to write both your books?
Yeah, so the research, the research existed, it just wasn't in the public domain. And so it was more this sense of how can we democratize knowledge? How can we take what is often publicly funded but publicly unavailable? You have to pay huge amounts for many of the leading research papers and documents. So it was really about making sure that people have access to this knowledge. And with the new book, it was also a question of that, because I still believe in these principles very strongly, but it was also coming from a place of, well, given that we're in for quite a turbulent time ahead, what are some of the ways that I could help? Like, what do I know about? What am I perhaps more practiced in that I can then lend my skill towards helping people to think differently about meaning and purpose at work, or resilience, or careers, or what are the qualities and the values that drive their decisions that mean that they could choose a job or change a job in order to have greater satisfaction from it, or in order to affect positive change. So it was really kind of my way of thinking, how can I contribute to this wider discussion and do something that's going to actually benefit people from the research that countless other extraordinary people have done.
Brilliant, brilliant. So you mentioned that, it's about behavior. And what are you seeing in terms of the ways that consumer behavior is changing?
So there's some interesting generational shifts, which is a contentious one, because a lot of people don't like to talk about broad trends that we see according to the cohorts of people through age. But we are seeing larger shifts around Gen Z and millennials and their expectations of good corporate citizenship, of companies standing for specific values. Many millennials, I think it was up to 40%, will take a pay cut just because they want to work for a company whose values align with their own. We've got the majority of workforces in the next 10 to 15 years are going to be made up of these groups. So we've got a large group of people already in and entering the workforce who are more interested in issues around social justice, sustainability, around ESG, around provenance of goods. So I think these key things we've seen for a while, and they've been amplified and catalyzed by the pandemic and the lockdowns. And I think the other element that we're seeing is this talk, which a few years ago was completely unheard of in boardrooms, talk around purpose and meaning, and this kind of older Greek concept of eudaimonia, this sense of striving for personal integrity and a sense of self-actualization. And younger people also want this, because if you can't own a house or a car or whatever because you're strapped for cash and the housing markets have priced you out, what are the things that you're going to look for that are valuable that your job can give you? These are some of those things. And against a backdrop of a kind of increasingly secular Western society, we're looking elsewhere to meet these desires and needs for belonging, for relatedness, for purpose. And I think increasingly we're looking to our employers and our jobs to give us that sense of, I guess, a kind of a rudder in life. So these key things are going to be absolutely vital in terms of getting the talent that we want into organizations, and also reaching out to consumers who want different things than they used to.
No, it makes absolute sense if you think about it. We spend so much of our life at work. I think the younger generations seem to have got it right, really. And also, I hadn't made that connection that you made, the fact that it's very difficult for them to purchase a house, so then they're trying to self-actualize in a different way. I hadn't made that connection, and again, that makes perfect sense. That's fascinating. Really great. So is this what's the shift that's driving purchasing decisions, would you say?
I think many of them come from these sort of shifts in values. I think the other thing that's really interesting that we're seeing is when we think about the kind of reactions that we see when we have uncertainty, or we have unpredictable contexts around us, when we're living through a time which is very difficult to navigate. Often what we strive for is a deeper sense of agency, of control, either over our immediate environment or in our lives. And this relates to some of our deeper psychological needs, which are innate, they're universal, and they transcend culture and time. So these needs are starting to show up more in terms of consumer behaviors, and they relate to our ability for self-determination, to determine what we want within our own lives. And so it connects with agency, our desire for autonomy, to be in the driving seat. It also connects with our desire for competence or skill or mastery, these things that enable us to kind of engage with and achieve those things that are meaningful to us. And then the final piece is around belonging and relatedness, to feel like we are part of a group of people that we want to be a part of, that we want to be connected with. And so I think these three elements are also showing up time and again in consumer behaviors, and also in terms of the brands they want to buy from and affiliate themselves with, or the businesses that they want to be involved in. It's like, well, how much of a say do I get in this company or with this brand? How much are you actually helping me to achieve my life's goals? How much do I feel a sense of affinity with your identity, with the brand or with the organization? And so these three core needs are also becoming more and more salient in the conversations we're having about organizations and culture, and about the consumer brand relationship.
I like that. Autonomy, mastery, and belonging. It's so simple, really, isn't it? But it's so profound and so tough. You talk about virtue signaling. Tell me what that's about.
Sure. So virtue signaling is when we conspicuously proclaim to uphold certain moral principles or values, and we do it for gratification. We do it to get the accolades of our peers, or to be perceived as being kind of in touch with and on top of social norms of the day. What it does imply, because it's a bit of a pejorative term, is the fact that there doesn't have much substance behind the word. So it's talking the talk without walking the walk. So it's really greenwashing or justice washing or climate, like whatever washing, and there's so many different kinds. It's basically about that. Yeah.
Okay. And so because consumers and certainly the younger generation really want to buy into brands and organizations that have integrity, if they're doing this virtual signaling, how do we avoid falling prey to that?
Such a good question, because it's really tricky, because so many brands do it, right? So one of the frameworks that I developed as I was looking at the brands that do this well, so I'm thinking about brands like Ben & Jerry's or Patagonia, those pioneering brands that everyone's heard about because they were doing it way before it was sexy or cool. And so these frameworks, well, the framework I devised is called the 4 C's framework. So the first C is about commitment, making a public commitment to a certain set of values or principles that you cherish, that you'll uphold. The second C is about being congruent. So it's about walking the talk, making sure you have evidence to support your claims. The third C is about consistency over time. So it's showing people that you haven't just proclaimed it and you're not just doing 1 or 2 actions, it's really building that track record. So when people look back over 2, 5, 10 years, they can say, well, okay, there is consistency in what they're doing, and they're proving that they really care about this. And the fourth and final C is about coherence in intention and behavior. And that's really about making sure that you're doing the right thing for the right reasons. So it's not just enough to say, well, we've been legally compelled to do X, or we've got pressure from our customers to do Y. It's making sure that you're doing it because you actually care, because maybe as a founder, you had specific values that you want to see enacted in the world, and your business was a great vehicle in which to actualize those values. So yeah, so those are some of the ways in which you can look at it. So
that makes
yeah,
sense.
about,
That
yeah.
makes total sense. You speak a lot of sense, actually.
Thank you.
It's very good. It's very good. And what would you say are some of these very deep questions? Sorry, I've gone all philosophical today. What are some of the deeper needs that we can meet in our customers to create more meaningful exchanges, would you say, or that businesses can do? I mean, I'm asking for myself as well, but that businesses can do to meet, in our customers, the deeper needs that they can meet.
So we talked about those 3 innate universal needs, which are very important. We then also have elements around values. So one of the things when we're talking about virtue signaling and we're talking about integrity is also to think, what are the values as a business that we uphold or that we care about? Is it about benevolence and universalism? Is it about making sure that we are extending care to the rest of the living world and the other beings with whom we share the planet? Or is it more about self-preservation and dominance? Maybe it's about getting ahead in a market and creating, for instance, high-end cars that are going to be bought by people who want to express their power. It could be any number of these things. But I think if you're able to identify, to assess, identify, and then communicate values that you stand for as a business, or to have a small number of people decide that and then permeate that out throughout the organization, it then kind of acts as a clarion call for other people who share those values to then be able to connect with a brand, have a greater sense of affiliation and identity with a brand. And that helps to build and forge a longer, more committed, more loyal consumer brand relationship. And indeed, the people who are coming into the organization, if they believe in the same values that the organization espouses in its public-facing branding and internally within its culture, they'll also be more likely to be intrinsically motivated and want to stay. So I think having a clear understanding of what your values are and how you communicate them to the world, and not just virtue signaling or being responsive to the latest trend, that's going to stand you in good stead to meet people's deeper needs.
Okay, perfect. That's good. Great. So tell me, what are clients when they're inviting you to come in and speak for them? Because this is quite a wide-ranging topic. What are they asking you specifically to say? Nathalie, come in and talk to us about this, or help us with that. What are their challenges?
Sure. So it's a range of things. So you've got the kind of the persuasive technology. How do we use behavioral science to create more resonant, fluent, and frictionless designs, apps, marketing? So it's looking at kind of like the persuasive technology and ethics piece. And on the other side is obviously the new work, or the more up-to-date work, which I'm doing now, which is looking at how to build resonant communication. So what can you do in terms of tools? Do you want to use active listening? Do you want to talk about mirroring techniques when you're using bots? We can also look at things like psychological safety in virtual teams and contexts, looking at self-determination, examples of thoughtful marketing that gives people back competence, agency, and relatedness. So it's looking at not only the technology piece and how can we make more seamless and more resonant and more joyful the interaction with the brand and the consumer. It's also looking inwards and saying, okay, well, when we dig deeper than the communication side of things, what is it that you can do? Who can you be? How can you use these tools within organizations, with your employees, with partners, and with your consumers in such a way that you understand the deeper needs that are driving them, that you can respond to that and get ahead of the curve. And then practical examples of brands that are doing this really well, so that people have examples that they can look to be able to start to apply these learnings in-house. So it's really a range of things. And then there's all the kind of facilitation that happens as well in the podcasting. Yes.
You're busy. So the piece that really caught my attention, because it's something that affects me and is that user experience, and when it's good, it's just because a lot of experience is so bad that when it's good, you just shout it from the rooftops. You really do. Can you give me some examples of some of the organizations that are doing this right?
Yes. So if we take the example of Instagram as a platform upon which many companies are reliant to get new customers in and to buy their products, on those images where you have several products that are possible for you to buy, the companies that do this well create a frictionless experience that feel very, very easy. And the way they do this is to reduce what's called cognitive load or mental effort. It's the total amount of working memory being dedicated to understanding what you're interacting with. And the second is around processing fluency, which is making sure that whatever you're putting into that image, whether it's video or a static image or text, is easy to process, is fluent and therefore more trustworthy and more pleasurable to consume. And so one of the tricks that is used by brands that understand this and that do this well is to have an image with, say, for instance, I don't have anything on me, but say I'm wearing a necklace here and I'm posing like this and it's oriented down. That's the image I see on the social media feed. I tap on the image of the necklace and then I get taken to the product page and it's a close-up of the necklace on my neck, so it's in exactly the same orientation. And then you get a close-up again, which is in the same orientation again, but much closer. That gives us a sense of not having to repeat information or not having to change the information that's repeated, so that as you go from one image to the next, it's getting faster and faster to process, which feels easier, which means by the time you get to the point of sale, you're already in this fluent yes space, so you're more likely to hit buy. So it's kind of these small repetitions that make it easy for people to digest and move from one step to the next with low mental effort, without new information, that help people get to the point of buying much more quickly and with less resistance. That's one example. In terms of other examples, good branded examples will be simply things like having perceptual fluency in such a way that you're making the text really easy to read. This is a very basic thing, but you'd be so surprised how so many podcasts and content creators automate the captions on whatever video it is that's selling, whatever it is they want to sell, and you can't read the text. And most people will want to be able to read what's there because sometimes they're not in the place where they can hear it. So making sure that the contrast is making the text legible at all points in the process is really important. Tricks like this, simple but effective.
And again, it's also simple and so obvious.
Yeah.
I wish you had been involved, because clearly you weren't, in some of the user experience that we're all going through with regards to sort of when we wanted to travel and do our COVID tests and this, that, and the other. Oh my goodness, let's not go there. But I wish you had gone there. So you mentioned podcasts. You also host a podcast. Tell us a little bit about that and what people can gain from listening to that, because hopefully they'll come and listen to it too to hear more.
Brilliant. Sure. Thank you for asking. So it's called the Hive Podcast. I've been running it for several years, and it looks at our relationship with one another, with technology, and with the living world. And the idea really is it's a platform upon which to bring voices that may not get as much airtime as I think they deserve, and get the ideas that people are really thinking about in tackling some of the biggest challenges that we face. So how can we create a sense of belonging in divided societies? How can we build a sense of ethics and values at the heart of persuasive technology? Or how can we better relate to our living environment, create a more regenerative future? These sorts of big questions. And it really looks at different perspectives on how people are approaching this, so that we can start to have more enriched conversations about what we could do together to create a more resilient future across those different levels and more. Yeah. That's it.
Fantastic. I've got a couple more questions before I let you go. I want to know a little bit about the demise of cookies, and we're not talking about chocolate chip, are we? How do you engage people more meaningfully with the fact that there is a demise of cookies, and if you could explain what that actually means in terms of what's happening?
Sure. So many data-driven marketers rely on the information they get from third-party cookies embedded on websites and apps to give them information about user behaviors, to be able to personalize the experience that you or I might have on any given platform. And it can be very, very helpful, because it means that if you have a specific interest in, I don't know, mince pies of a particular brand, and I have a particular interest in olive oil, then maybe that's what we end up getting served more of on particular platforms that sell food, because it's tracking past behaviors. Now, the tricky thing is that Google has said that within the next couple of years, they're going to stop the use of third-party cookies on websites, which means that all of that data that previously marketers were accessing, they're not going to have access to. They are creating like a black box solution, but it's not the kind of thing that I think is going to be the right fit for all marketers. So the question is, in the absence of all this data, which will make it trickier for many of us to personalize, what can we do to create more meaningful experiences? And here, this is where we can think about things like not just demographics, so where and who people are, like age, gender, ethnicity, location. We can think about some of the deeper things that drive them. So if we're thinking about things like the kind of content that we know engage people online. It's not just about the vitriolic outrage. It's about things that lift people's moods. It's about things that enable you to live out in your days in a way that you feel are more fulfilling. It's about belonging again. It's about a sense of connection to something that's bigger than yourself. So being engaged in an action that's going to have a ripple on effect. So I think if we look at the bigger trends that we talked about earlier with consumer behaviors and changing expectations, in the absence of cookies, we can look to wider societal changes and the values of a particular industry or a particular brand to be able to use that as the rudder to design and create content that's going to attract people who are similarly minded. That's going to be the most interesting thing, is to be creative within these new parameters, understand human psychology, and then design content and user experiences that are going to be much more interesting at a much deeper level.
Wow, I had no idea that. Actually, I think that's a really interesting repercussion. I think that's really good. So maybe an unintended consequence. I don't know. You'll be more in demand than ever. Nathalie, what thought would you like to leave our listeners with regards to the understanding of the online psychology?
The thing that I think I would like to leave with is that we're all seeking, generally speaking, in our lives, we're all seeking things that make us feel as though we matter and that we're contributing to something that's bigger and that's more meaningful. And I think now more than ever. And so if you're thinking about using behavioral sciences and what we know from the psychological research to be able to create better experiences for people, don't just leave it on the thin level of making something more frictionless or making something a bit easier to navigate. Think about what is it that you're helping people over the long arc of their lives to achieve. And I know that might sound a bit anathema to kind of the sort of the fast-paced world of technology and dopamine loops and constant information and notifications, but I think if we can start to think in longer time and say, okay, well, as organizations, as businesses, if we're creating user experiences for people or we're creating consumer brand relationships, what are some of the longer term life-based goals that we can help people to achieve or feel like they're chipping away at in order to give them a greater sense of depth and meaning of interaction when they're connecting with us? Yeah, that's where I'd like to leave.
That's really profound. Thank you. That's really, really good. Really love that. Nathalie, it's been a pleasure. I hope you have enjoyed yourself.
Thank you, I have.
Fantastic. Well, listen, and thank you everybody for listening to The Speaker Show. If you enjoyed this episode, which I'm sure you have, please give it a rating on Apple Podcasts and keep up with future episodes on the Speakers Associates website, which is speakersassociates.com. Don't forget to order a copy of Nathalie's book, and also make sure that you contact Speakers Associates in plenty of time to book Nathalie for your next event. I will see you all next week. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye for now.